Tiger walks into graduation ceremony. When students see what's in its mouth, they freeze. The sound of breaking glass pierced through the ceremonial music as something large and orange burst through the side entrance of the university auditorium. Screams erupted from the back rows as parents fumbled for their phones. The graduation ceremony at Eastern State University had been proceeding with the usual tedium of such events. Names called one after another, polite applause, the occasional embarrassing whoop from an enthusiastic family member. Dean Richards froze mid-sentence at the podium, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the magnificent Bengal tiger now standing in the center aisle, its amber eyes scanning the crowd of black-robed graduates. In its mouth was a small, limp form that made the blood drain from every face in the room. The tiger's muscles rippled beneath its striped coat as it slowly padded down the center aisle. The graduation caps that had moments ago been adjusted with nervous excitement now sat forgotten on heads that remained perfectly still. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the soft padding of the tiger's paws on the carpeted aisle, and the faint whimpers from the back of the room where parents stood paralyzed with fear. Professor Helen Martinez, seated in the second row of faculty chairs, felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized what the tiger was carrying, a small, stuffed tiger mascot. The university's symbol, now dangling from the real predator's jaws. Time seemed suspended as the tiger reached the front of the auditorium. Security personnel had pressed themselves against the walls, their hands hovering over weapons they were clearly reluctant to use. The tiger stopped directly in front of the first row of graduates, where Michael Chen sat frozen in his seat, his valedictorian medal catching the light as his chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The beast's eyes locked with Michael's, an intelligence behind them that seemed almost purposeful. Then, with deliberate gentleness that belied its fearsome appearance, the tiger placed the stuffed mascot at Michael's feet. "Nobody move," came a calm voice from the back of the auditorium. A man in khaki clothes moved slowly down the aisle behind the tiger. "I'm Nathan Keller from the Wildlife Sanctuary. This is Raja, and he's actually trained. Please remain calm and still." The collective breath that had been held by 300 graduates and twice as many guests came out in a confused mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and muffled sobs. Professor Martinez recognized the man now. He had been featured in local news for his wildlife conservation work, but something wasn't right about this scenario. The university's strict protocols would never have allowed this, even as a surprise. The dean's face confirmed her suspicions. His complexion had gone from white with fear to red with fury. "This was not authorized," Dean Richards hissed through clenched teeth. "Get that animal out of here immediately." Nathan approached the tiger with practiced movements, speaking in low, soothing tones that only the first few rows could hear. The tiger responded to his commands, turning to follow him back up the aisle. A strange tension hung in the air, half relief that the tiger was trained, half lingering terror at having a predator in their midst. Phones were now recording from every angle as Nathan and Raja made their way toward the exit. The ceremony that had been so predictable just minutes ago had transformed into something none of them would ever forget. Michael Chen bent down and picked up the stuffed tiger mascot, noticing a small collar around its neck that hadn't been there before. His fingers trembled as he turned over the attached tag. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the wild. Congratulations, valedictorian." He looked up at the retreating form of the tiger and its handler, a chill running through him despite the warmth of the crowded room. The following morning, Eastern State University buzzed with tension and excitement. The graduation tiger incident, as it was now being called, had exploded across social media platforms. Clips of Raja walking down the aisle had been viewed millions of times overnight, with headlines ranging from "dangerous stunt at university graduation" to "planned surprise goes viral." Dean Richards had called an emergency meeting of all department heads, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage as he paced the conference room. "This is a PR nightmare," he fumed, slamming his palm on the polished table. "Who authorized this? Who thought bringing a live tiger into an auditorium full of people was appropriate?" Professor Martinez sat quietly, observing her colleagues' reactions. Most seemed genuinely shocked, shaking their heads in denial. But Marcus Weber, head of the biology department, kept his eyes fixed on his folded hands, a muscle in his jaw twitching visibly. "The sanctuary claims they received official authorization," Dean Richards continued, "on university letterhead. With my signature, which was clearly forged." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Professor Weber, whose connection to the wildlife sanctuary was well known. He had been taking students there for field research for years. "Marcus," the dean asked, his voice dangerously quiet, "do you have anything to say?" Professor Weber cleared his throat, finally looking up. "Nathan Keller is a former student of mine. He's been running education programs at the sanctuary for 15 years. The tiger, Raja, was rescued as a cub and has been part of his conservation awareness presentations. Nathan would never do anything to put people at risk." "That doesn't answer my question," the dean pressed. "Did you arrange this?" "Not exactly," Weber replied, shifting uncomfortably. "I may have mentioned how uninspiring graduation ceremonies have become. How students these days need something more impactful to remember the importance of their education and its connection to the real world." The room erupted in voices of disbelief and condemnation. Professor Martinez watched as Marcus Weber's academic career imploded before her eyes. She had known him for 20 years, a brilliant mind with an unorthodox approach to education. His passion for wildlife conservation had always bordered on obsession, but this crossed every line of professional conduct. Outside the administrative building, students gathered in small clusters, reliving the previous day's events with animated gestures and pulled-up videos on their phones. Michael Chen sat alone on a bench under an oak tree, turning the small stuffed tiger over in his hands. The message on its collar had kept him awake all night. There was something familiar about the handwriting, something that stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. "You okay?" asked a voice, startling him from his thoughts. Lisa Park, his research partner from Senior Biology Labs, sat down beside him. "I saw you on the news. You were right in front of it." Michael nodded, still distracted. "Did you know about this?" he asked suddenly, showing her the tag on the stuffed animal's collar. Lisa's eyes widened as she read the message, her expression shifting from surprise to something more complex. "Professor Weber," she whispered. "That's his handwriting. Remember how he would leave notes on our field journals?" The realization struck Michael like a physical blow. Professor Weber had been his mentor for 4 years, guiding his research on endangered species rehabilitation. The professor had always pushed boundaries, challenged conventional thinking. But this was beyond reckless. Across campus, security personnel escorted Nathan Keller into the campus police station for questioning. The wildlife handler maintained a calm demeanor, answering questions with the same patience he showed when working with dangerous animals. "I received what appeared to be official documentation," he explained to the campus police chief. The request emphasized the educational value of bringing Raja as a symbol of the university's commitment to conservation. Everything seemed legitimate. "A tiger," Mr. Keller, the chief, replied flatly. You brought a live tiger into an auditorium filled with people, based on a letter. Nathan's composed exterior finally cracked, a flash of doubt crossing his features. When you've worked with someone as respected as Professor Weber for as long as I have, you don't question their methods. Perhaps I should have. As the questioning continued inside, a small crowd of environmental science students gathered outside the station, some holding hastily made signs supporting both Nathan and Raja. The incident had divided the campus. Many were outraged at the reckless endangerment, while others defended the dramatic statement about wildlife conservation. No one could deny one thing: Eastern State University's graduation ceremony would never be forgotten. 3 days after the incident, the university campus still hadn't returned to normal. News vans remained parked along University Avenue, reporters approaching anyone in ESU apparel for comments. Professor Weber had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, his office door locked and sealed with university security tape. Nathan Keller had been released from questioning but faced potential charges for endangering public safety, despite his insistence that Raja had never posed any real threat. In the university library's quiet study area, Michael Chen met with Lisa Park and 3 other senior biology students who had worked closely with Professor Weber. Their table was scattered with newspaper printouts and open laptops displaying various coverage of the event. "He's going to lose everything," whispered Thomas Rodriguez, scrolling through an article describing the university's response. 30 years of research and teaching gone because of one stupid stunt. "It wasn't just a stunt," Lisa argued, her voice low but intense. "You know how desperate he's been about the sanctuary losing funding. He's been trying to raise awareness for years through normal channels. Nobody listened." Michael said nothing, still turning the small tiger mascot in his hands. The message continued to haunt him. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the wild. Professor Weber had said almost those exact words to him during their first field expedition 3 years ago, when they tracked endangered Florida panthers through the Everglades. The memory was vivid, standing in knee-deep water as the professor pointed out nearly invisible tracks, explaining how predators maintained ecosystem balance. "You remember his lecture last semester?" Michael finally spoke, the one about ecological collapse and public apathy. The others nodded. It had been unusually grim, even for Weber, whose climate change lectures were notoriously bleak. The professor had stayed after class, looking defeated as he packed up his materials, telling Michael that sometimes he felt like he was whispering into a hurricane. He said we needed a symbol, something powerful enough to make people look up from their phones, Michael continued. "I just never thought he meant literally bringing the symbol to them." Outside the library windows, another demonstration was forming, this one larger than previous gatherings. Students from the Environmental Science Department had been joined by community members and even some faculty, holding signs with messages like "Save Raja" and "Conservation Matters." The university administration had condemned the tiger incident as dangerous and unauthorized, but the conversation it had started was growing beyond their control. In his small apartment off campus, Nathan Keller sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. 17 missed calls from the sanctuary board members, dozens of emails from media outlets, and a text message from Professor Weber that simply read, "I'm sorry. I thought it would work." Nathan had dedicated his life to wildlife education, believing that helping people connect with animals was the key to conservation. Now his career, like Weber's, hung in the balance. The sanctuary board had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss Raja's fate. Despite being raised in captivity and specifically trained for educational programs, there were already calls to transfer the tiger to a more secure facility. The public's perception of danger often outweighed reality when it came to predators. Nathan had seen it happen countless times, fear driving decisions that harmed the very animals he was trying to protect. Back on campus, Dean Richards sat in his office with the university's legal counsel and public relations director. The initial shock had given way to strategic damage control. Surprisingly, applications for the environmental science program had spiked in the days following the incident, with prospective students specifically mentioning the Tiger Professor in their inquiries. We need to distance ourselves from Webber's actions while acknowledging the importance of the cause he represents, the PR director explained, sliding a draft statement across the desk. Conservation education is still a core value of this institution. A core value that doesn't involve endangering hundreds of people, the dean retorted, though with less fire than days before. The viral videos had generated more publicity for Eastern State University than any official marketing campaign in recent memory. As evening fell across campus, Michael Chen made his way to Professor Webber's house, a modest bungalow a few blocks from campus that the professor had filled with artifacts from his global conservation work. Michael had been there many times for research meetings and the occasional department gathering, but never like this, never with such uncertainty hanging in the air. The professor answered the door looking older than Michael had ever seen him. The energetic enthusiasm that typically animated his features had been replaced by a weary resignation. He gestured Michael inside without speaking, leading him to the cluttered living room where books and papers covered every surface. "I suppose you want an explanation," Webber said finally, sinking into his worn armchair. "I want to understand," Michael replied, taking a seat across from his mentor. "Why risk everything like this? Your career, the sanctuary's reputation, even Raja's future." Professor Webber rubbed his eyes, the weight of consequences clearly settling on his shoulders. "Do you know how many species went extinct while you were completing your undergraduate degree?" he asked. "Not historically, not theoretically, actually disappeared forever during these 4 years." Michael shook his head. "Dozens, confirmed. Hundreds, probably. While we published papers and held polite symposiums, the sixth mass extinction accelerated." His voice cracked with emotion. "I've spent 30 years trying to make people care, Michael. 30 years of data and research and reasoned arguments, and the needle hasn't moved nearly enough. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows as twilight deepened into night. In the dim light of the living room lamp, teacher and student sat in silence, the weight of a damaged planet hanging between them. A week after the graduation tiger incident, the Eastern State University Board of Trustees convened for a special session. The large conference room in the administration building was packed beyond capacity. Faculty members stood along the walls, while students crowded outside the open doors, straining to hear the proceedings. Professor Webber sat at a small table facing the board, his posture straight despite the visible strain of the past week. Beside him sat his department chair, there to provide context for Webber's distinguished but now tarnished career. Dean Richards opened the session with a summary of events and the subsequent investigation, his tone formal but noticeably less hostile than in previous days. The board members listened impassively, occasionally making notes as Richards detailed the security breaches, the forged documentation, and the potential liabilities the university had faced. Before we continue with disciplinary considerations, the board chair announced, "We'd like to acknowledge some developments that have occurred since the incident." A screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a graph of media mentions of Eastern State University over the past week, a dramatic spike that dwarfed all previous publicity metrics. Next came statistics on application inquiries, social media engagement, and most surprisingly, a substantial anonymous donation specifically for the Environmental Science Department, conditional upon expanded conservation education programs. None of this excuses the serious breach of protocol and safety, the chair continued, but it provides important context for our deliberations. Professor Weber was then given the opportunity to address the board. He rose slowly, looking around the room at colleagues he'd worked alongside for decades. His gaze lingered momentarily on Michael Chen, who stood near the back with several other students from the biology program. "I won't insult this body by claiming I didn't understand the seriousness of my actions," Weber began, his voice steady. "I knew bringing Raja into the graduation ceremony was wrong by every institutional standard. I knew it could end my career. I did it anyway, because after 30 years of teaching about extinction and ecosystem collapse, I've learned that data alone doesn't move people to action. Symbols do. Experiences do." He paused, taking a breath before continuing. "I've dedicated my life to this institution and to my students. I've published research, secured grants, and built programs that have brought recognition to Eastern State. But if my students graduate without feeling the urgency of the environmental crisis we face, then I've failed in my most important duty as an educator." Outside the administrative building, another demonstration had formed, larger than any previous gathering. Students, community members, and even some faculty carried signs supporting not just Weber, but the broader cause of conservation education. Local news crews filmed as the crowd chanted slogans about educational innovation and environmental awareness. Back inside, the board moved to deliberation, asking Professor Weber and others to step outside. In the hallway, Michael approached his mentor. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "what you taught us matters." "It will keep mattering." Professor Weber nodded, a faint smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. "The lesson wasn't just about conservation, Michael. It was about finding your voice in a world that's very good at not listening." After 45 minutes of closed deliberation, the board called everyone back in. The chair's expression gave away nothing as she prepared to deliver their decision. "Professor Marcus Weber," she began, "your actions were unquestionably dangerous and violated numerous university policies. There must be consequences for such serious lapses in judgment." Weber nodded, accepting what was coming. "However," she continued, "this board also recognizes your 30 years of exemplary service and the unique educational opportunity this incident has created. Therefore, our decision is as follows. You will be suspended without pay for 1 semester and will be required to develop comprehensive safety protocols for any future educational demonstrations. Upon your return, you will lead a new initiative on innovative approaches to conservation education with appropriate oversight." A murmur ran through the room, not vindication, but not career destruction either. The dean looked relieved despite himself. Professor Weber had been a difficult colleague, but an undeniably valuable one. As for Nathan Keller, the Sanctuary Board had reached a similar conclusion. A period of probation, followed by the opportunity to develop more secure educational programs. Raja would remain under his care, though public appearances would be more strictly regulated. The tiger, oblivious to the controversy it had sparked, continued its daily routines at the sanctuary, occasionally entertaining school groups from behind proper safety barriers. The Eastern State University graduation ceremony of 2025 would be remembered not just by those who attended, but by countless others who saw the footage of a Bengal tiger padding down the aisle with the university mascot in its mouth. For some, it remained a reckless stunt that endangered hundreds. For others, particularly the environmental science graduates, it became a powerful symbol of their education, a moment when the abstract became visceral, when statistics about endangered species transformed into an amber-eyed reality staring directly at them. 2 months after graduation, Michael Chen stood before a group of summer camp students at the wildlife sanctuary. Behind him, safely separated by appropriate barriers, Raja lounged in the shade, magnificent and unaware of his celebrity status. Michael had accepted a position as an education coordinator, deferring his graduate school plans to help develop the new programs that had emerged from the controversy. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the wild, he told the wide-eyed children, echoing the words that had been written on the small tiger mascot's collar. Not just about animals, but about courage, about speaking up for what matters, even when it's difficult. As the children asked their questions about tigers and conservation, Michael caught Nathan Keller's approving nod from the back of the group. They had found an unexpected partnership in the aftermath of the graduation incident, both committed to ensuring the educational opportunity wasn't wasted. Professor Weber, though still serving his suspension, had been consulting on the new programs, his expertise too valuable to ignore despite his temporary disgrace. The controversy had faded from headlines, replaced by newer events competing for public attention, but something had shifted at Eastern State University, a new approach to education that recognized the power of direct experience, tempered now by proper safety protocols. The tiger had long since left the auditorium, but the impact of those few minutes continued to reverberate through the institution and beyond, a reminder that sometimes the most unforgettable lessons come from the unexpected moments when the wild and the civilized worlds briefly, dramatically intersect.